There is an instinctive hope for healing within the soul of every person. I suspect that each of us at some time in his life has asked the question that Shelley posed when he said, "O fairy, in the lapse of years, is there no hope in store? Will yon vast suns roll on interminably, still illumining the night of so many wretched souls, and so no hope for them? Will not the universal spirit e'er revivify this withered limb of heaven?" I have seen this hope expressed in many ways, as I'm sure you have. The almost pleading look in the eyes of a patient who's been bedfast for years. The look of wistful hope of one attending some healing service or mission, reaching out in the hope that, as Shelley puts it, the universal spirit will revivify the withered limb of heaven. A few years ago, I visited the shrine of Lourdes in France. It was a memorable experience, one full of pathos. Thousands of people in all states and stages of illness and incapacity on a mass pilgrimage of hope to this shrine of reputed miracle healing. But the saddest thing of it all, as I look back, was something that was well-intentioned and certainly was set forth out of great love. A little pamphlet that was put in the hands of pilgrims coming for healing. I'm not very well versed in French, and so I couldn't translate it, but my oldest son was along, and he was studying in France at the time and speaks French very well. So he read the thing to me, and I found some words that were quite shocking, and yet why they were suggested. It said, "Many of you will return home without healing, just because it is God's will that you be sick. This is your blessed privilege, for there is no other way to heaven except suffering." Well, actually, if this were true from a logical point of view, then any kind of remedial measures would be opposition to God's will. So then we could conclude from this logic that the sicker you are, the better. It would also follow that Jesus, who went about healing all manner of sickness, would have to be considered the prince of sinners. Now, if a person accepts the idea that life is chance and that sickness is simply a quirk of bad luck, or if he thinks that he's a sinner and that he's doomed to mortal experience, writhing under a lash of pain that he believes is God's will for him, then he may hope, because he can't help himself from that. Hope is a part of the innate movement of the soul of man. But he will not really expect healing, and he will make no attempt to be other than that which he believes himself to be. And sadly, the sickness is a part of what he believes himself to be. But once he catches the idea that he is a spiritual being, the very self-livingness of God, created in the image likeness of the infinite, then he will never again be satisfied until he finds some way to improvement in health and well-being. Not only will he work by all the means at his command, but increasingly he will begin to command the means, because he will discover resources within himself, of which, until he arrived at a true appreciation of himself, he hadn't the slightest concept. Now remember, we said once he catches the idea. Remember in the funny papers years ago, and I guess occasionally you still see it, when a person suddenly had a flash of revelation that showed a light bulb over his head? Caught the idea. Flash of light. That's the key. Catch the idea. This is the new birth. This is the awakening. This is the revelation that is the first beautiful, wonderful step of many great steps that leads to healing. Paul says, for the earnest expectation of the creation awaiteth the revealing of the sons of God. In other words, this hope that you have, this expectation of something better, something greater, will continue to be nothing but a hope until suddenly you catch the idea. Till you get that revelation of the sons of God, that you are actually a spiritual being. Many of you remember the oft-told story of Myrtle Fillmore, who with her husband Charles, the co-founders of the Unity work, were beset with physical troubles. She was a victim of what in those days they called consumption. Today it's called tuberculosis. She was given little chance of survival. She and Charles attended many metaphysical lectures and studied many philosophies that passed for new thought in that day. And one night, while listening to a now forgotten lecturer, one idea seemed to dawn in her consciousness. The light bulb flashed. And it was simply, I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness. Now, she lived in a time when it was pretty generally believed, that what the parents had, the children would have too. This was just the way life went. And her parents had been subject to tuberculosis that had run in the family, and so it was expected that she would have it too, and she did. But she suddenly realized, I am a child of God. This is my inheritance, and I don't have to inherit sickness in my family. Suddenly it happened. Now, it wasn't an instantaneous healing bodily, but it was an instantaneous revelation, which meant it was a healing mentally. There was an awakening of a new self-image, a whole new relationship to life, a change of consciousness. The idea came alive in her. It was her own personal revelation, as it were. And in months, she was normal, and she lived for more than 40 years beyond that time. Remember the words of Job? I had heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee. This is a thing which I don't think we can overlook. Many of us have been hearing by the hearing of the ear for years and years and years. We've read everything there is in the metaphysical field. We've heard all the lectures. We've been exposed to all the concepts. There's nothing new that I can say or that anyone else can say. And this is why I put the emphasis in this meeting on the fact that we're here together in concert, and something must happen, and it must be above and beyond anything that I say, because I can't say anything new to you. Something has to happen. I had heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee. When is it going to happen? Who could foretell that this would happen to Myrtle Fillmore, that suddenly the light shone? There's a general belief, you see, that health and sickness are opposites, like God and the devil. And that man is kind of caught up in a struggle between two opposing forces. Many people really believe this. That, you're sort of tugged and pulled back and forth, and some days you come down with an ailment, and it's almost as if nothing I can do about it. Sickness got a hold of me this time. Actually, we must come to realize that there is only life in varying degrees of manifestation. And that what we call sickness is not a force in itself, but it is struggling health. That there is only wholeness being experienced fully or in part. If you're not as healthy as you would like to be today, it's simply because the wholeness which is you is only being partly expressed. Your wholeness is being frustrated. but you are never less than whole. You're never less than whole. The whole of you is always you, even though you may be only experiencing part of it. Now, let's face it, that's a startling idea. And some of us may nod our head to that intellectually, but that's the idea, you see, that we need to get into our consciousness, that we are whole creatures. And that means then that no matter what the condition, no matter where we are in experience, what we are is always secure, because we are always whole and perfect creatures. That's hard to see, because you don't see it when you look into the mirror. And you don't get that evidence, surely, with an electrocardiogram all the time, or when the doctor listens with his stethoscope, or when you get an x-ray made. You may not always see that. But the point is that wholeness is a spiritual thing. It's a transcendental thing. A blind man feels the trunk of an elephant, and he may give a description of it, and his description obviously is going to be about a trunk. Now, certainly an elephant is not a trunk, though an elephant is a trunk, has a trunk. Medical science, you see, will analyze you, and it will give its verdict, diagnosis, or its prognosis. And it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's because the physical part of man is there, and that's all that the man can work with physical equipment. And so his electrocardiogram and his x-ray and his stethoscope and his microscope and his lab activities and so forth, all of these are very real and very wonderful and do such a marvelous job, but dealing strictly with the physical side of man. Now again, an elephant has a trunk, but an elephant is not a trunk. And man has a body, but man is not a body. Does that startle you a little bit? You are more than a body. You see, there is a transcendence to you. And this is that idea that we must catch. The body is the house in which we live. But there is a force, which we may call life with a capital L, divine energy through which this body is built and sustained. But even though this physical body is being expressed, as Paul says, seen in a mirror darkly, or is being expressed imperfectly, or projected inadequately, life, the capital L, does not get sick or diseased. Life doesn't get old, and life doesn't die. Consciousness shapes life into illness or into the releasement of wholeness. But man, you see, is a transcendent creature. Now, this is something we deal with, we hear about, we talk about, but somehow it must dawn in us as a consciousness. What is the something within a seed? The something within a man? That is the transcendence. We really don't know. Actually, research in biology is beginning to find it to be observable, and this is a wonderful thing that's happening. Some refer to this transcendence of the seed, and the seed has a transcendence too, you see. Call it an electrodynamic body. Others call it simply the life field. Because after all, if a seed didn't have something transcendent in it, it could never be any more than a seed. You can take the seed apart, you can analyze it chemically, and if the seed is for, say, a red pansy, you can't find any red in the seed. And if it's for a tree, you certainly can't find a tree in the seed. So there's something transcendent about the seed. And so there is, as the biologist refers to, an electrodynamic body, or a life force, that actually is non-material. And this is the thing about man that we need to accept to a larger degree. And so this leads us then to a conclusion. And we can only accept it intellectually at first. And that is that spiritual healing is possible not because of some magic worker or healer, not because of some special intercession with God, or some abrogation of his will, or taking part in some healing service, or going to a healing shrine. Spiritual healing is possible because man is a spiritual being. Period. In other words, you can be healed not because of what someone does for you, or even for what you do to yourself. You can be healed for only one reason: because you are whole. The acorn can become an oak tree only because it is an oak tree. You see, even the word potential, this word is used an awful lot today, and I think it's great because it's showing a whole new dimension in the field of human dynamics. And the word potential seems to be the closest thing that people can accept in terms of transcendence. But even the word potential is not quite there. It doesn't quite give the whole idea. The seed has more than a potential to be a tree. The seed is a tree. It is an energy field that has nothing else but a tree within it. It is a tree, and it's more of a tree than the large growth with branches and trunk and leaves that appears later. This is why we say you are a whole creature, and you're just as whole when you're ill as you are when you're well. Now that's the idea that we need to get in consciousness. Thus we see that the process of spiritual healing is not limited to and is not purely and simply within the technique of reaching God, because if we understand transcendence, we know that God isn't to be reached. God is. God is that which is individualized in and as that transcendence which you are. And the transcendence is you, so there's nowhere to reach. You are because God is. So then the process of spiritual healing is the technique of changing your limited self-image from seeing yourself as an inadequate, insufficient, sickly person to realizing that you are whole, even though you're not now demonstrating. That's why you have to believe before you receive. This is what Jesus has in mind, you see. Pray believing you have received and you will receive. Pray believing that the transcendence is a reality, not something that will be. See, I think many of us have had the idea that if we pray long enough and hard enough, then somehow we can create transcendence. That we can somehow gradually develop the capacity to be a spiritual being. And I say it, if you want to be shocked, I say that if you do not now have within you the transcendence of spirit, if you are not now the whole creature in God, then forget the whole thing. There's no help for you. No help for you. And all the praying and all the church going isn't going to help one single bit. It can only help you if you believe it's already true. And then provide you with the techniques and the treatment and the suggestion by which you can then begin to act as if it were true, and as Jesus puts it, go forth into the world and preach the gospel. That means not out here on the street corner, but into the world of your own thinking, and spread this message into the cells and organs and fibers of your being, so that ultimately you begin to reflect completely in the manifest what you are in the transcendence. Now let me show you just a simple little illustration of how consciousness works. Now, this is very simple, very naive, and obviously we can get far more complicated than maybe should to really understand the whole process. Suppose you're sitting in a restaurant and you have before you a bowl of soup. And you pick up your spoon and you start to take that spoonful of soup that you can hardly wait for. You can smell the aroma, and you just imagine this is going to be a glorious dish of soup, and suddenly you find right in the teaspoon a fly. Now what happens? Well, unless you have a very strong stomach and are a very well-disciplined person, it's a little more than just taking the fly out and then going ahead and eating the soup. In most cases, we suddenly lose our appetite. Now, what has happened? The fly didn't hurt us or poison us. What actually happened is, in consciousness, we move from ease to disease. And as a result of this, our whole relationship with the soup and ultimately then with our whole system becomes disturbed. In some cases, I know people have just gotten sick to their stomach and they get away from the table and they can't eat another thing. Now, at the moment, you could remove the fly. You could remove the thought of disease by knowing that God's substance is pure and wholesome and you agree with all good food and all good food agrees with you, and go right ahead and eat the soup and enjoy every bit of it. But we're not always quite that big, are we? Now, you see, this illustrates a very important point, because there was nothing actual material or organic about this. It was all in consciousness. And one can get so sick to the stomach, you see, that actually you could be just kind of destroyed for the rest of the day. Now, in seeking healing, let's sort of get the idea that the need then is to completely reverse this process, to move from dis-ease to ease. Now, just imagine something. Sometimes I say, if you can imagine a man walking down a dark lane at night carrying a lighted lantern, you can imagine that little glow of light that goes around him. And then I say, well, then imagine the process reversed, the man walking in the light of day carrying a dark lantern, spreading darkness around him. That's hard to imagine, but you can imagine it. So imagine the reverse of this. Just imagine now that you take this bowl of soup, and as you start to put the spoonful in your mouth, suddenly you find the complete opposite of the fly. Now, what would that be? I don't know. But the fly had the power to make you disturbed and upset. So the opposite of that might be kind of finding something there that made you feel, I'm drinking the elixir of the gods. Kind of a ridiculous thing to even think about, isn't it? But just kind of imagine that suddenly something in the soup reminded you, this is going to be the most powerful, potent healing tonic I could ever take. And what happened? Well, the fact is, if the fly could make you upset, that realization in a brighter side of the soup would suddenly make you just intoxicated with health. It would just go right to the soul of you. You'd feel so good. Not only the most beautiful soup I've ever had, but suddenly you see everything beautifully, almost as if you had some pot or something, you know. But suddenly, life is different again. You're turned on. Everything has suddenly changed and has new meaning. All because of the soup? No. Any more than your upset stomach was because of the fly in the soup, you see. But because suddenly you saw this thing in a new light, and as a result, you turned from dis-ease to ease. As I said, it's a terribly naive kind of illustration. Then this whole matter of understanding spiritual healing, understanding the process, you see, is very transcendent. And you can't deal with it with the usual method of understanding things. And this is why we have to work constantly to imbue everything with the power to influence each of us for wholeness. Simple little technique is just to know that the food that I eat is spirit substance. And every time I go to the table, I am taking into my system beautiful spiritual substance that is healing and harmonizing and renewing every cell and organ in my body. If you really believed that, then it would have just as much power, you see, to turn you on as the fly did to turn you off. The fact is, many of us do just the opposite. You see, you get so conscious of trying to eat the right foods that we become, what do I say, dietary hypochondriacs. In other words, we're so concerned with getting the right calcium and the right nutrients and the right vitamins and so forth, and we're so fearful that we might take something in our system that's going to hurt us, that actually we've got flies in everything. That's being not nice, I know, but the point is, you see, that we must begin to deal with this transcendence of our life and to know, as Jesus puts it, that it is not what you put into your mouth, but what comes out of it that really counts. And so determine that you're going to let the right things come out of your mouth. And thus, when you deal with your affirmations and your treatment, you are expressing this dynamic power, and you are speaking the word of truth, relating to the wholeness of you. And the more you do this, the more you're going to experience wholeness in every part, in every cell, in every function, in every organ of your being. Now, this is about as simple as you can get in this matter of spiritual healing. But I think that it's important that we grasp the idea that spiritual healing is not complicated. It's not mystical. It's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And I say it's simple in the sense that we're dealing with very simple fundamentals of life. It's not easy because one has to keep on and keep on and keep on until he catches on. You see? And when you catch on, when you finally get that idea, then it will have the same and even far greater effect than when you caught on to the fact that you had a fly in your soup. The opposite effect. Completely invigorate you, fill you and thrill you with a new consciousness and stimulate you to a new awareness of wholeness. But the wholeness was there all the time. You were not aware of it. When that which is perfect is come, says Paul, that which is in part shall be done away. But the perfect is the whole of you that is the only thing that's ever really true of you. Keep that in mind the next time you take any sort of an affirmation of truth and say, I am a spiritual being, I'm whole and perfect, I'm one with God, I'm whole now. Know that you're not just suggesting this thing, hoping it will be true. You are identifying with that which is true of your transcendent self. And to the degree that you believe it and work with it, that transcendence is going to be the dynamic influence in manifesting health and wholeness in the physical, because it has nothing whatever to do except to constantly lead you to that which it is and that which you're intended to be.